Turning now, we have joining us online, I believe we have Frank Gaffney online. I'm going to tell you a bit about him. The reason I want him to join us today is because if there's anyone I trust in Washington, D.C. as an actual national security expert, years and years of involvement in national security policy in Washington, D.C., he is the founder and the executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy. He has also worked in a variety of places in government, starting with back in the era of President Reagan, when President Reagan was dealing with the threat of the communist expansion mode and the idea of working against communist expansion against Russia. This gentleman we have joining us now, Frank Gaffney, was part of that idea of understanding the breadth of the warfare needed to challenge communism. He's brought his tremendous national security background to the fore in his work in the Center for Security Policy, just a tremendous expert with respect to national security policy. So I want to ask him, actually, let me make sure, do we have Mr. Gaffney online?
I'm here. You can hear me?
I can. Hi, Frank. Nice to have you.
Hi, Debbie.
So I want to.
Great to be with you.
I want to start with this. In this, and there we see there's Frank Gaffney, but he's on the phone. There was just a huge outcry in Washington when President Trump announced that after a phone call with President Erdogan, I believe it was Sunday ago, that he was not going to keep American troops at the border of Syria as Turkey was planning on invading. Erdogan's invading, and President Trump announced he was going to pull back American troops. Many people got upset about that, said essentially, hey, the Kurds are our allies. You can't be leaving them in harm's way. I'm going to just start with that. Knowing that that was the first event in this particular incident, was your sense that that was a strategic mistake of President Trump, or were you on board with the idea of pulling American troops back?
Well, at the risk of sounding like an armchair quarterback, I was not all that keen on this idea, Debbie. And what you've just said, what you've reported on what's happened in the past few hours is encouraging, and I hope it will bear fruit. I am very concerned about Erdogan for a number of reasons, and I think we've talked about him in the past. This is a full-on Sharia supremacist who seeks, as you mentioned a moment ago, to build a caliphate. I mean, we've recently been hearing about the Islamic State's caliphate. I don't think the Turks would be much better, honestly. And what we've seen Erdogan doing in the course of this invasion tends to reinforce that concern. That's part of the problem, Debbie. The other part of what concerns me so much about Erdogan and what he's been doing, what Turkey has been doing under his very protracted rule, is that he's engaged in, I think, subversive behavior inside our own country, in league with the Muslim Brotherhood, who he has now kind of become the patron of, and that's very troubling too. So we have problems with the Turks in the region. We have problems with the Turks here, and it seemed to me that giving them a sense that they could have their way in Syria, which I think was the practical effect of moving our forces, initially a relatively small number, and now virtually all of them, out of the way of the invasion that Erdogan told the president he was going to undertake, it seemed to me, likely to conduce to pretty much what we've seen: violence and murderous attacks on people with whom we had been fighting.
Absolutely.
Alongside.
I was going to mention on the Kurds for a moment, just to tell our listeners, the Kurds are not a uniformly, they're not a religious entity. They're more of an ethnic entity. There are Kurds who are Christian, Kurds who are Muslim, Kurds who are maybe nothing at all, but Kurds is an ethnic group, right?
Kurds are definitely an ethnic group with a presence in a number of countries in the Middle East, but they don't have a homeland of their own. And you're right, they have various religious affiliations. I think most of them are Muslim, though some of the more Arab and doctrinaire Muslims, I think, are given to considering them, if not fully apostates, then certainly not completely with their Sharia supremacist program. So they've been targeted by not only the Turks for a long time, but also by the Iranians and the Iraqis over the years, and of course the Syrians. So it's a group of people who have more or less, and it's not an unbroken record of success, I will say, but more or less have been on our side in these various conflicts that we found ourselves in, and I think that was my other principal concern about the president's decision. Was it was pretty clear, in as much as said so on occasion, they're on their own. And that was worrying.
Right, and Kurds, actually, to be clear, were considered, especially we Americans, grateful for them because they were helping America and our forces in weeding out ISIS. I mean, the big accomplishment of the Trump administration was to get aggressive against ISIS, and Kurds fought on our side. You want to expand on that? They were very involved in helping root out ISIS to the extent it's been done.
Yeah, look, they weren't just doing it for us. The guys in ISIS, as I say, were among those Sharia supremacists who didn't have much use for the Kurds. But they were willing to serve as kind of the ground forces for the president's efforts to eliminate the ISIS caliphate. And, you've, I'm sure, been hearing stories, I'm sure your audience has as well, of the sentiments of some of our special forces personnel in Syria who had, in fact, found they were very robust, often, in fact, decisive comrades in arms in the fight against ISIS, and felt very unhappy about abandoning them to their fate, which in the hands of either the Turks or the Iranians or ISIS, and perhaps even the Syrian government, was not likely to be a very happy fate.
Absolutely. And I want to talk about Turkey for a moment. We're speaking with Frank Gaffney, the founder of the Center for Security Policy. And with respect to the country of Turkey, it is an astonishing thing. You mentioned Erdogan having encouraged the caliphate. He's talked many times recently encouraging jihad against the Kurds, Cyprus, Greece, the Balkans. He talks openly about wanting to reestablish the Ottoman Empire. This is not a vague, dubious concern that Erdogan, the head of Turkey, would like to establish the Islamic Caliphate. He's a jihadist who gets to run a country. So here's the other issue about it that I want to ask you your thought about it is, so Turkey is a member of NATO. That was a perhaps unwise decision, but part of our American commitment in NATO is to defend our NATO partners. So it put the American in a little bit of a tough position because Turkey's part of NATO, and Erdogan told us ahead of time he was going to do this allegedly small little incursion. So does this make you, I don't know, I guess I have a bunch of questions, but number one, should Turkey even be part of NATO? And number two, is our support of NATO mean that we were in any way restricted from fighting against the Turkish invasion into Syria?
Well, these are important questions, Debbie. Turkey, at the time, when they were admitted to NATO, was a huge asset to the alliance. They had the largest army in NATO, second only to our own. It was disciplined. It was quite powerful. The Turks are very, very, shall we say, vicious fighters. And so I think it was considered a coup at the time to have them helping to hold down part of that flank of Russia that would the Soviet Union at the time, that would otherwise have been an even bigger threat to us and our allies there. The problem has, as you said, Debbie, been that in the past decade or so, this country, which had been quite solidly in our camp, a secular Turkish Muslim country, but run by principally the military, or at least governments that were willing to adhere to the Constitution or the program that was laid out shortly after World War One by the founder of modern Turkey, Ataturk, which was deliberately designed not to have it be a Muslim state, an Islamic state. What has happened with Erdogan, who is, as I've said, all about an Islamic state and very committed to expanding it, for heaven's sakes, is that we've witnessed under his rule essentially the end of that Ataturk approach, and increasingly this has become a more and more of an Islamic republic, as they say, with all of the trappings of sort of theocratic influence, and the secular stuff is over the side. People who don't want to be living under Sharia law are persecuted, and it's gotten to be less and less of an ally all the time. In fact, we've published a book at the Center for Security Policy, which people can get for free as a PDF if they'd like to, at securefreedom.org, entitled "Turkey Ally No More."
Yep.
It's a collection of essays that just describe why that's so. This is the problem, and unfortunately, just quickly, there's no way under the NATO rules to expel a member state from it. If there were, I think we would have already probably started taking actions against the Turks. We need to take certain actions against them in any event. I think, not selling them any more arms, that's now being increasingly adopted, but also not sharing sensitive intelligence with them, because I think really they're not on our side.
Yep. Your view, which I am actually in agreement with. I was surprised that we were not going to stand with in this particular circumstance, stand with the Kurds in Syria, to repel the Turkish invasion. But the larger question of America involved in foreign wars, and many Americans critical of the idea that we can't be the world's policeman, we can't be everywhere, and also in the broader context of the complexity of all the players in the Middle East. And we really we have countries that are under Islamic rule that have varying degrees of desire for a caliphate, the intolerance of people who are interest in a caliphate. We have, shifting loyalties. And it's a very complex thing. And the question is supposed to come back to for our national policy is, what is the American interest in getting into these wars? I mean, sadly, the Middle East has been at war for 1,400 years or something. I mean, it's endless there. So the dividing line of what justifies our presence in any war in that part of the world has to in part be around the question, what is our national security interest? So I thought President Trump was trying to make the point that we can get at repelling this, and we can protect our Kurds with some of the way without our own precious soldiers being involved. But that may have been the wrong call. But I'm sorry, that was kind of a speech. That was my Monday morning quarterbacking. That's right. But now I want to go back to asking you a question.
Well, welcome to your armchair, kid. Look, you said a lot of things there that are worth exploring, and I don't know if we've got the time to do justice to it. But very quickly, my own feeling about it is that where you can have an outsized influence on events in a region where you do have strategic interests, they may not be obvious to some folks. They may be a product of, as much as anything, of trying to make sure that bad things don't happen that would be very detrimental to your interests. And I think that's what's really at stake in this particular case of Iran, developing more of a capacity to project power throughout the region, the so-called Shia Crescent that connects the Iranian territories through Iraq, through Syria, through Lebanon to the Mediterranean. I think that's something that we really do have a vital interest in. I think we have a vital interest in containing what the Russians are up to there, and what we were able to do with something on the order of 1,000 men and women on the ground. Not in some huge footprint, not in some huge combat situation in which we were losing lives or expending vast amounts of treasure, but with a minimal presence, using principally proxies like the Kurds. We were able to keep the Turks at bay, the Syrians at bay, the Russians at bay, the Iranians at bay. That was a heck of a deal, I think.
Yes.
And the kind of thing that I think most Americans, if they even knew we were there at all, would not have been, objecting to. Unlike, immense amounts of personnel and treasure and equipment engaged in some sort of occupation of a country that has no interest in us being there and is unlikely to behave better because we are making that investment in them. And Afghanistan and Iraq and arguably, other places in that region come to mind as places where you don't want to be fighting major ground wars. That's for sure. But I will say, as a person who believed very strongly that when we were attacked from Afghanistan, we needed to take out the Taliban. As a person who believed very strongly that Saddam Hussein was engaged in not only violating the various sanctions that had been imposed upon his regime, but was working to build capacity that he made clear he intended to use against us. We needed to remove him as well. I wouldn't have done it the way we did it in either of those cases. Once the immediate mission was accomplished of getting rid of that dangerous actor in the case of Afghanistan, the Taliban, in the case of Iraq, Saddam and his regime. But I would say, I think that to the extent that our presence in that part of the world, particularly afloat on our naval vessels, with a minimal land presence, with the ability to project power in the air, is a means of helping to manage circumstances that do matter to us. Do matter to us not just someplace else, but can matter to us at home. And I think that's the kind of exercise of peace through strength that President Trump has, in his best moments, said he espouses.
Frank Gaffney, that was a really articulate way of saying my shorthand comment I was going to make to kind of wrap up was just that I want the Islamic regimes in this world that have any interest in jihad, or not just regimes, but entities of all kinds in this world who think they have and they should be moving forward to create a caliphate. There are jihadists in mind. I want all of them afraid of America, afraid that we won't let them succeed, afraid that they sense our presence. So to me, so you said that in a very articulate and well-educated way. I'm kind of saying kind of Main Street America. I want the bad guys, bad actors in this world afraid of us and aware that we will fight to defend the idea of freedom in America and other places in the world, because our pushing back jihadists and Islamic supremacists over there keeps us safer over here long term. So wrap up.
Could I just make one quick point
Absolutely.
on that very quickly? I think you're right. The other piece of it, which I think Americans need to be clear about, those folks are, by their terms, our enemies. They believe that it is Allah's will to impose Sharia worldwide, and they have to do it, and we're the principal obstacle to doing that. So if they don't fear us, if they don't feel dissuaded from trying to accomplish that, you can bet that they will be at our throats, not just against, again, our personnel overseas, but here at home as well.
Very well said. Frank Gaffney, founder and executive chairman of the Center for Security Policy. You can find their work, many, many insightful articles full of information at securefreedom.org. And Frank, I thank you for taking time talking with us. Thanks for joining me today.
It's a blessing. Thank you so much, Debbie.
Thank you. So, folks, I'm telling you, I really, I had many more thoughts. Obviously, you can't cover this vast subject in a short interview, but the main thing I mentioned earlier, and I'll close out this little segment with this idea of armchair, Monday morning quarterbacking national security experts pontificating on Twitter, pontificating on Facebook, talking as though they understand, this was wrong and this was right. I like that Americans care and they're following the news, but I also think the complexities of the Middle East, the complexities of the various players involved, their mission, our mission, how much we can actually, as Americans, genuinely say that our interests are threatened by certain groups. I think the issues are more complex than the armchair quarterbacks Monday morning quarterbacking crowd wants to give. I think that President Trump, in this decision, his conversation actually with President Erdogan 2 Sundays ago, saying we're going to pull our troops back and letting Erdogan move into Syria, it was very, very hard to understand, and not standing with our allies, the Kurds, extremely troubling. And so I do understand people's concern. I'm grateful for the way it came out. It seems to have come out. I mean, the story never ends in the Middle East, but right now we're standing where we have Erdogan asking President Trump to help him with peace negotiations with the Kurds. This is a good step forward, and I'm grateful for that. And I'm also grateful that there are organizations like Center for Security Policy and people like Frank Gaffney staying on top of the news, understanding it, able to explain it to people who care very much about keeping America safe and free.